Hello everyone, this is MC Deck Discussions and I'm Abby Small. Welcome to another deck discussion. Today we're going to discuss a Magneto deck in Protection. It is called Meeting the Master of Magnetism, and in this case, meeting him again and again and again. So this is a readying type of deck here, and you'll notice we have plenty of allies, and that is to facilitate some of that readying. So you will notice that of our supports here, we have added the X-Jet and Utopia. So Utopia is in here because if each of your allies has the X-Men trait, increase your ally limit by 1. It's not really in here for that purpose, but can certainly be used for that. There are a lot of times in this deck where Magneto is actually going to defend for himself or allow the villain to just attack him. But the main purpose of this card is that it has this response: after an X-Men ally enters play, exhaust Utopia, ready an X-Men character. So the main character that you want to ready in this deck is for certain Magneto. So with that, we have the vast majority of these allies are X-Men allies then. We have Angel, Armor, Beak. Beak is in here to also help with getting rid of some of that threat, because we have his response: after you play Beak from your hand, remove 1 threat from a scheme for each X-Men ally you control. With that in mind, Beak was one of the additions of suggestions for this deck. This deck was actually built from, I put out a video saying, hey, I'm planning on building a Magneto deck in Protection. I have some ideas about him doing some readying. Anybody have some suggestions? And so I had suggestions from actually 3 content creators: Smoothie Brain Gaming, Solo Marvel Champion, and Daring Lime. Daring Lime actually even threw together a quick deck to kind of demonstrate some of the cards that I might want to add. And so Beak was one of those, in addition to Utopia. So Utopia was a great addition. So thank you, Daring Lime, for that. So Utopia was included in that for the reasons I mentioned a little bit ago, but also Beak. In addition, right after Beak is Forge. So Forge is also considered to be a pretty critical member of this deck because we have the X-Jet in here. So the X-Jet is our main resource generator. So we can exhaust the X-Jet and generate a wild resource for a player whose identity has the X-Men trait, and Magneto has the X-Men trait. Speaking of which, checking out Magneto here, we can see he has 10 hit points, a hand size of 5 on the hero side, a hand size of 6 on the alter ego side. And we're going to want to mention his magnetic pull ability at some point, so we might as well do that here. Oh, and also he has 2 thwart, 2 attack, and 2 defense. That also is going to become important, especially the attack and thwart. But he has the magnetic pull ability, which the action is discard cards from the top of your deck until a magnetic card is discarded. Then add that card to your hand. And all of his own identity-specific cards are magnetic cards, so any of those cards would come to his hand if he discards them, which essentially means that the vast majority of the time he has an extra card available when he's on his hero side, at least if he uses that ability. So coming back to Forge, so we have the X-Jet in here. So in general, that'll provide an extra resource in order to play plenty of cards. But let's go ahead and skip ahead. I'll come back to any of these allies that I think we need to later on. But the one event card that was added to this deck is What Doesn't Kill Me, 3 copies of that. And What Doesn't Kill Me has the hero action: heal 2 damage from your hero, then ready your hero. So that's one way that we're going to be able to ready Magneto so that he can deal more thwarting or damage. But the X-Jet helps to guarantee that we are going to have that physical resource necessary in order to play What Doesn't Kill Me, because it has this requirement. You must have a physical resource in order to pay for it. It has to be at least one of the resources paying for it. In addition, coming back to the allies now, we have Lockjaw, which, by the way, is meant to be a resource sink, because Magneto is known for having dead hands. I'll come back to why that is in a little bit, if I remember to. And then we have Nick Fury. Nick Fury helps to generate, more card draw most of the time. Although there were 2 games in which Nick Fury helped to contribute to defeating a villain by using his other ability here, right? So after Nick Fury enters play, choose one, remove 2 threat from a scheme, draw 3 cards, or deal 4 damage to an enemy. So I actually had, in the plays that I had, this was tested against 4 different villains in standard and expert. In 2 of the games, he helped defeat the villain by dealing 4 damage here, plus an additional 2 damage from his attack. So that was a kind of a surprise, but at times that happens. And then, but after that, we have Nightcrawler. So Nightcrawler is the other reason for what I consider to be the necessity of having the X-Jet. So coming back to Nightcrawler, so Nightcrawler is a 3-cost ally with 2 thwart, 2 attack, and 2 hit points. But he has this important interrupt. When an X-Men character would take any amount of damage from an enemy attack, spend an energy resource and return Nightcrawler to your hand, prevent all of that damage. So there are times when Nightcrawler is needed in order to prevent that damage. And so he was very useful for that. Plus, if he gets back into your hand, he actually can serve as another resource sink, meaning if you draw into a dead hand, and I better talk about that next, I guess. If you draw into a dead hand and you have Nightcrawler out in play, if you make sure to use Nightcrawler's ability, you put him back into your hand, and now you have a card you can play. In addition to that, when you play this card, because you hopefully have Utopia out, you will then be able to ready Magneto again. So let's go to why sometimes you have a dead hand. It doesn't happen in every game, but if you play Magneto enough, you typically do have an instance when he can have a dead hand, and that's from a combination of his wrapped in metal cards, because you have to have, you can attach to a non-elite minion. If there are no non-elite minions out, then you can't play this card, and there are 2 copies of that. There are also 2 copies of Magnetic Missile, which is discard a minion with wrapped in metal attached. So there are multiple reasons why that card might not be playable. So that's now 4 cards. And he has Master of Magnetism, which is a resource generator. It has 2 resources on it. So a double resource generator, which is awesome because it facilitates the play of your cards, but that's now 6 cards that have the possibility of being in your hand and not allowing you to play. So having a couple of resource generators can be very beneficial for Magneto. Doesn't happen all the time, but I've had it happen enough times that having that, I call it dead hand insurance. So Lockjaw and Nightcrawler are kind of dead hand insurance in those cases. Okay. All right, moving on. I don't think I'm going to cover the rest other than Professor X is a necessity in this deck so that you can confuse the villain in order to go down to alter ego side when you need to, because you will certainly need to at times for certain situations. All right, so some other important elements of this deck. Let's get down to why we want to ready Magneto frequently. So sure, he has 2 attack and 2 thwart initially, which is pretty decent. However, he also has his cape. So this is the 3rd way that he can get himself readied. So if he has his cape in play, which is his cape is an upgrade, then after he uses his, he has this response after you resolve your magnetic pull ability, exhaust Magneto's cape and ready Magneto. So that means he can attack or thwart again. In addition, his armor here has this response. After you resolve your magnetic pull ability, if you discarded at least one of the following resource icons, then you get these benefits, right? So he can end up getting, if you discard a mental resource icon, you can get +1 thwart on Magneto. A physical resource icon, Magneto gets +1 attack this round, and it lasts for the whole round, these do. And an energy resource, Magneto gets +1 defense this round. So if, like, let's say the first time he attacks for 2 damage, then if you've used this ability and he possibly got that physical resource icon, then he could attack again for 3 damage. And then if you use What Doesn't Kill Me, or you have an ally come in and ready him with Utopia, then he could attack again for another 3 damage. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 damage. However, another important card in this deck is Specialized Training. So Specialized Training is a 1-cost player side scheme, and it takes 5 to defeat it. And when defeated, each player who does not control a specialization upgrade chooses one set-aside specialization upgrade and puts it into play under their control. There are 4 to choose from, but most of the time, I ended up choosing the one that gives him +1 attack. So I had, I would say, of the 8 games I played, at least half of them, I was able to have that in play. So, and in those games, I did every single time have him where he attacked 3 times. So instead of doing 2 damage, 3 damage, and 3 damage, he dealt 3 damage, drew a card, because that card lets you draw a card, dealt 3 damage, drew a card, dealt 4 damage, and then 4 damage. So 11 damage just from his basic attacks. And then, because you're drawing extra cards, most of those times I then was able to play his, let's see which one, Metal Shards card, which is a 7-cost card that, a 3-cost card that deals 7 damage to an enemy. If this attack defeats the enemy, gain a tough status card. So that's a nice benefit as well when it gets used. But very often that's how I ended up finishing. It happened many times that I played where I ended up dealing 11 damage from Magneto's attacks because of having used Specialized Training to get out that other card. And then he attacked for 3, then 4, then 4. So there's his 11 points. And then he did 7 more points of damage with his Metal Shards. And then I had frequently had, because I have so many allies out here, then those contributed whatever else I needed to finish off the villain. So that happened pretty regularly in these games. So it was pretty cool to see that pan out. In addition, we have another way of readying him, but it's not offensively, but it's still, this was a high payoff card. I used it pretty much once a game, and that was Indomitable. So we have 3 copies of Indomitable here, and that has this response. So this is an upgrade, right? So you would play it out and have it available to you, and it just sits there. I would have it sit there multiple turns, but sooner or later I would end up using it, and it would have this response: after a hero defends, discard Indomitable, ready your hero. So that was really nice for allowing some allies to stay out and play longer and be able to have extra activations, or allow him to, sometimes he would choose to defend because he also had out his Magnetic Bubble. So his Magnetic Bubble is another upgrade, and it gives him Retaliate, and it has this Force Interrupt. When you would take any amount of damage, place it here. Then if there is at least 6 damage here, discard Magnetic Bubble. So it was really nice to defend with Magneto in order to allow the Magnetic Bubble to stay out there longer. So he would still not take any damage, and he would retaliate against any enemies attacking him. But at times he also wanted to take damage. So sometimes he would just take the damage in his face, because you can't play What Doesn't Kill Me unless you have the ability to heal 2 damage from your hero. So you have to take some damage. So I would purposefully let him take damage, usually early on in the game, and then here and there throughout the game. And sometimes defending with him against an enemy that attacks hard. I should probably talk about the villains I tested against, but somebody like Magneto, so he played against himself, kind of a multiversal situation there. And there were times when Magneto attacks pretty hard, so defending for 2 or sometimes 3 because of his, his armor, his Magneto's armor being in play. So defending for 2 or 3, he'd still take some damage, but then because he had Indomitable out, he could ready. So the readying there was more as a preparation so that he could have multiple readies when his turn came around, and it worked out very well. So coming back to the suggestions that were made, so you can always read up on Smoothie Brain Gaming's suggestions. That's what led to the inclusion of Lockjaw, and when combined with Solo Marvel Champion suggestions, also led to that inclusion of Indomitable. So they didn't necessarily suggest those together, but their general suggestions led to me thinking about having Indomitable in there as I did the playing. So I played this multiple times. So before my official play test, I actually played against Klaw quite a bit to kind of test out what was working in the deck. Lots of things weren't really working that well. And so there were lots of tweaks made to the deck. And then, so those suggestions came together to eventually lead to this deck. Right? And so when I had the official testing then, played in both standard and expert, he was undefeated against all of these villains in standard and expert, playing once in standard, once in expert. And that was Klaw, Taskmaster, Red Skull, which Red Skull I thought was going to be a real challenge. And then Magneto. Red Skull was the one that really made me see the importance of Nick Fury in the deck, by the way, because Red Skull is the one who brings out, every single turn that that the villain has each round. He brings out another side scheme, and one of those side schemes allows you to, when you defeat the side scheme, it allows you to pick any of your allies and bring them into play. And the vast majority of the time, I chose Nick Fury, and he led to card draw, which really facilitated a lot of these other things to happen. So Nick Fury was a real necessity against Red Skull, but he certainly helped out against villains in general. But sometimes he was also discarded and never got played. So that could happen in any Magneto deck, of course. All right. So I think that's pretty much it. Let me just check my notes. Okay, just to conclude here, so if you want a strong control deck that can deal regular damage throughout the game, then this is a great protection choice. It's highly flexible for any needs of the moment, but it also provides an adjustable amount of damage mitigation as well, because you could control how much damage you are taking. And it can produce some damage bursts, not huge amounts, but enough to defeat a villain in solo and certainly contribute to multiplayer games. So with that, that's it. And please like and subscribe, helps to grow the channel if this is the kind of content that you appreciate. And I'll talk to you next time.